Or does it say recording? Oh, it's recording. All right. Welcome, guys. This is the first of many in the series of Community Table. I just wanted to introduce Community Table. It actually started in 2014 right here in Abu Dhabi, but it was a real conversation over tea with a bunch of women. It was like a women's circle where we talked about various social and societal issues, ranging from debates of different curriculums in schools to going to co-ed schools to talking about marriage and childhood and parenting and lots of things like that. And it has evolved over the years. Most obviously, especially in this past couple of years, there's lots of global issues that became so close to home. So the topics have changed and expanded in its reach. So we're so glad that this COVID thing happened, because we started learning to be comfortable with using other platforms in order to communicate with people around the world. So before, we would be looking for people that are in our local community to talk about various issues. But now we can basically exchange informations and share and learn and grow with people from in anywhere in the world. So I'm really glad that you guys are here with us today, both of you not in Abu Dhabi. I know that various people that are going to be joining in or listening in or reviewing this later are going to be mostly in the Middle East or North Africa. So it will be really nice to, especially when talking about an issue that concerns the United States of America, to hear voices from the United States of America. Just to introduce the June theme. So this June, we decided to adopt the topic of Black Lives Matter. And I think it came out of a necessity. It wasn't like I was planning this for many, many months ago. It was due to the response that came out from the region towards the Black Lives Matters movement, which was mainly not understanding it, not understanding this, why are people reacting that way, to not agreeing with the way how people react, to suggesting solutions that seems like, haven't you thought about this? And it seems like a very simple solution. But also, unfortunately, there was a lot of voices that basically sounded like, why should we care? And why don't we care about our own issues? Why should we care about the Black people in America? And that, unfortunately, also could include people who are from the Middle East in the US. So just to drive this today, what we're going to do is most obviously introduce you guys and your backgrounds and where you live and all of that, and your ties to the Middle East, if you have any, or if you identify with that. And then we're going to go delve deeper into breaking down reactions of the Arab American community to what happened with George Floyd. And of course, after revealing that there was an Arab American involved in the narrative somewhere and the reactions there. And then we will take it from there to how to be an ally and hijacking the movement, to various other issues. So why don't we start with having Mona introduce us to her background and her affiliation with the community, and then we'd like for Rasha to do the same. So Mona, the mic is yours.
Thanks, Isra. So my name is Mona Hayder. I was born in Riyadh in Saudi. But I was only there for 2 years. My family had to leave as a result of the Gulf War, but I'm Syrian. So that's always fun at a border crossing when they're like, where's your Saudi passport? I don't got one. I don't get that Saudi check. Sorry. I wish a little. No, I'm just kidding. I'm proud to be Syrian. Yeah, both my parents emigrated to the United States, first to Chicago, then to Detroit, and then ended up settling in Flint in 1971. Um, and it was a part of, brain drain. My father was a doctor, top of his class. It was that kind of bringing in a brain.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, unmute. Sorry.
Okay, that's okay. So yeah, and we settled in Flint, and in high school, I moved back to Saudi, but this time to Jeddah. Again, Syrian, not Saudi, but that's just been part of my story. So I had that experience as a young woman, being 14 years old, and actually 14 years and 9 months when in Michigan, where I grew up, you would be able to get your permit for driving. And it was a deep sadness for me that I wasn't in Flint at that time. Um, and like experiencing that viscerally, to be a woman in a woman's body in Saudi at that time. But then, we came back that same year. It proved to be too much of a culture shock for me and my younger sister. So we ended up coming back to Flint and lived out the rest of our young adult lives there. I ended up moving to New Mexico as a young woman after a tragedy in my life. And then I moved, before that I lived in Syria. So I eventually did connect to my own roots. I
Wow.
moved to Damascus after college and studied at Jama Abu Noor. Um, I did Arabi, Islamic studies, Hadith, Tajweed, and just like your typical run-of-the-mill curriculum at Jama Abu Noor. And then I came back and moved to New Mexico, sorry. And then, and then a year ago, we lived in Morocco for a year. My husband was teaching at an English language learning school that his god brother had founded. And it was a great experience, but I don't speak Darija, and my French is garbage. So it was challenging. Also, just acknowledging that I have a deep colonial wound from the French, and seeing the influence there of French society was very triggering. As somebody who's attempting to decolonize my mind and thoughts and culture and practices. So the French, there is a love for Francophone everything in Morocco still, and it's very difficult to, for obvious reasons, because the French influence there is still so strong, whether it's the military or the economic influence. So we came back to the United States after just under a year, and we've been here ever since, alhamdulillah.
Wow, that's a lot of going back and forth with reconnecting with the region, but in different areas. So literally MENA, so Syria, and then going to North Africa also and experiencing that. And now you're back in the US just in time for a lot of work. Rasha, could you give us a little bit of, overview of your background, your connection to the Middle East, reflections on that, and we'll go from there.
Thanks, Isra. First, I want to thank you for setting this up. I think this is going to be really beneficial for the whole Arab American community and internationally. So my background is not as varied as Mona's. I haven't lived as many places and gotten those amazing experiences. But I also was born in Saudi, and then my parents immigrated here when I was around 2 years old also. So, that's something we have in common, which is pretty cool. So my parents immigrated here. We moved around the States pretty consistently until I was in about 3rd grade. And then we settled in the Nova area. And grew up here, went to high school, went to college, and then
Nova is Northern Virginia for people in the region. Northern Virginia.
Yes, sorry, Northern Virginia. We always like to, make sure that it's very clear that we're in Northern Virginia. We're from Northern Virginia, not the rest of Virginia. Yeah. so I finished high school. So I grew up in this. Now the Northern Virginia area is also very diverse, which is awesome. So I always had diversity, growing up around me. And I was definitely exposed to a lot of different cultures, a lot of different issues and things. And as Isra knows, I was very, very active in my college days and high school for specifically the Palestinian cause, but really just give me any cause and I'm there for it. So then I got married. I moved to Qatar for 8 years, lived there for 8 years. I had my first child, had my second child, and then we moved back to the States. Well, it was back to the States for me when my youngest was 6 weeks old. So my experiences in Qatar were very eye-opening. And I think that as Arab Americans, or those of us who kind of grew up here, and we have our parents telling us all about the culture and everything, and you kind of have this need to connect, and you feel like, oh, maybe over there it's better, and maybe I'll feel more welcomed. It will be like my place. But I did not find that was the case. So it was eye-opening, and it's definitely something that made me really sort of become more entrenched in my American identity, and how my American identity fuses with my Arab identity to create this amazing meld that I feel like a lot of Americans go through, whatever their background or their culture is. So yeah, it was just it was an interesting experience. So we've been back for about 7 years now, and very happy to be back, and very happy to be doing this call with you.
You're back just in time. Okay, I'll just keep on the other side. So I'm like, you guys are there. You have all of this work and stuff like that. I want to rewind and take you guys, tie this back to Black Lives Matter, which is the talk that we are trying to link to and to reflect on today. So a lot of what the reignition of Black Lives Matter this time around, of course, was ignited by the death of George Floyd. And I remember that it was the straw that broke the camel's back. It was just a day after Amy Cooper, and it was like, at that time there was Ahmaud Arbery, and all of that was happening, and it just built up so much. So when people were watching the video, at that time there wasn't lots of information on what happened, why was he arrested, what was going on, all of that. And as the information came out, it was the second or third day that somebody mentioned, guys, as we are all reflecting, so everybody around the world started reflecting on racism in their community. And someone called out and basically said, let's look at the whole picture, looking at that the police wasn't all made up of white males. There was actually an Asian in the big picture. There was an Arabic store with an Arabic owner in the big picture. So we need to reflect on all of that. And I think people took that very literally about the character of the individual, and were not able to see what was meant by, let's look at the big picture. Mona, would you like to reflect on the response of the Arabic community when it turned out that the owner of the store was actually Arab American?
Yeah, I mean, we have to face reality that anti-Blackness within Arab culture is so pervasive, and it feeds into colonialism, it feeds into white supremacy, but it's much more ancient than that even. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he, whenever an issue of racism came up in Arabia, 1,500 years ago almost, he would call it out as ignorance, as jahiliyyah, as something that he came to eradicate. And the fact that Arabs, and specifically Muslims who were brought up in this culture of like learning that tradition, and then within our own communities experiencing colorism, and even the erasure of Black Arabs within the conversation has just been so problematic and sad. And that we're even taught that as young kids, that Arabs are Saudi, Arabs are Palestinian, Arabs are Syrian, and that North Africans, they're not really Arab. That's something that that they're originally Sahrawi, they're originally whatever it is, and that's something that is so just ingrained in the culture. And it's so, it is one of these things that we have to actively cut out of our brains. We have to like our brains are plastic, neuroplasticity. And when we make the choice to rewire our brains in a non-colonial, non-Jahili way, we're able to do that. We know that it's possible. And so that's what anti-racism is about. So when all of this was happening with George Floyd, the thing that I saw online that was so heartbreaking, that was just to lay the fabric of what is going to come of a society that doesn't even see Arabs as potentially Black, right? So when this happened, Arabs were just like, well, what do we care? This doesn't affect us. Why is everybody losing their minds about this issue? And that was the thing that broke my heart as somebody who has a master's degree in Christian ethics, for the sake of decolonial studies, for the sake of Black liberation theology, for the sake of liberation theology, period. When I saw Arabs saying things like, well, why can't they do it more like Martin Luther King Jr.? Why can't they do it more like Gandhi? And being like, you don't get to literally police the way that a stolen people get to ask for their liberation, get to call for their liberation. You don't get to do that. And you also don't get to use your person of color card to get out of this, to get out of doing the hard work of calling out racism within your own community. Just because we are people of color doesn't mean that we just get a pass because we have hard lives too, because Islamophobia hurts us. That doesn't give us a pass. And so I was seeing a lot of that, like, oh, we're oppressed too. What about Palestine? What about Syria? What about Yemen? And it was just like the pain of Black America couldn't exist as a justifiable cause for our hearts because it wasn't Arab. It wasn't a quote unquote Muslim cause. And that was the thing that for me, I had people DMing me. I had people writing to me with like deep confusion. Like, why should I care about this? How about because it's living, breathing people with sacred living souls, how about that? And that's enough.
Rasha, about also the reaction from when we found out about the Arabic store owner and all of that coming up. And everything that Mona have just said, it was definitely all of the points that I wanted to touch upon on the reactions. But
absolutely. I mean, I co-sign. You don't need my cosign, but I co-sign on every single thing that she just said. So you brought up two things when you first started talking. You're talking about the Arab store owner, and then you're also talking about how the cops who were involved were multiracial, not necessarily just white, right? So that's like kind of two different things. Right. So with regards to the Arab store owner, and I think the reaction from the Arab community like really disappointed me to the point of why I am like, no, this has to change. I think before when things, before, this wave, because, it's always comes in waves, right? I mean, we had Castile, we had, so many other, Black men who were murdered by police. But for me, this really galvanized me because I was like, I can do something, So with, I don't know if it's a human thing. It's just, you know, but we tend to listen to our own more than you know, people from other groups, right? So, you know, for me to talk to, you know, different people, I do that all the time. But I felt like going back to my Arab community and speaking to them about this and being involved and being you know, trying to really make them understand was really a role that I could, you know, it would really bring some good things out of it more than anything else. So when the store owner came out, and it's, you know, he was Arab.
Hashtag was made, right?
I'm sorry?
There was a hashtag that started going around when that came out. Not all Arabs or something like that. Or
like not all Arabs?
Yeah. Something like
right.
that. I remember that.
So,
everybody was on it.
And that's the thing that, like, really, I was like, wow, are we really acting like white people right now? I mean, it doesn't really make it boggled my mind. I mean, nobody said all Arabs are racist, you know? Arabs have a racism problem, absolutely 100%. You know, the words we use to describe black Arabs or black Muslim Arabs, you know, our acceptance of them in the community, all of that, we all need to really turn inward. And I really wish that I had seen from the community less defensiveness and more listening, because what was asked of them is exactly what we as Arabs ask of others when we talk about our own issues, whether it's the Palestinian issue, the Syrian issue, or Iraqi issue. We ask for people to listen. We ask for people not to judge the victim. We ask the people to, you know, not put more burden on the victims and the oppressed in order to, you know, fight for their own rights. Whereas the Arab community turned around and did the exact same thing. You know, it did the exact opposite, actually. So it was just, you know, it was mind-boggling to me. So, you know, first you came out with the not all Arabs are racist. Like, nobody said Arabs are racist, you know? Do we have a racism issue? Like I said, yes, of course we do. And we need to turn inward, and we really need to work on those. And then it was, well, you know, like Mona said, why are they rioting? Why are they looting? You know, they shouldn't be doing that, you know? And which is, you know, kind of exactly. And then, you know, as you know, every closet racist will pull out MLK and be like, well, MLK said this and MLK did this. Dude, MLK was attacked. He was assassinated. There was a lot of violence in his movement, but we tend not to want to look at that, right? And I think it's so interesting that the whitewashing of history has affected us Arabs too, because for those of us who grew up and were educated here, it affected us too, and we were, you know, kind of whitewashed or brainwashed in the same exact way. So we have to recognize that not only our own Arab culture and ancestry have racism and colorism in it, but we also have to recognize that we were also subject to the systems here in place in America to whitewash us and brainwash us even more. So, you know, it's just something that really, I was like, wow, how are you guys not understanding this? You know, I mean, when I talk to somebody about the Palestinian cause and they come at me with Palestinians need to do this, Palestinians need to do that, I'm like, nope, stop the conversation right there, because you're talking about the oppressed, and you're trying to tell the oppressed and putting more burden on them. And that's not okay, you know? So, and the Black community is asking the same of us. So why can't we wrap our minds around that and accept that, you know, and become real allies, you know? Because another part of this is I saw so many members of the Black community out there, you know, talking and typing the same things and in these groups. And I was like, wow, that they are in pain. They are hurting right now. They are scared. Their family members, you know, the young Black men and their family members are scared to leave the house for fear of not coming home safe. And then on top of that, they have to argue with these people who are telling you not all Arabs or not all, you know, or whatever it is. And I was like, no, that's not okay. You know, I saw a meme and it was perfect, you know, whereas for me, if something doesn't affect me personally, it's an intellectual conversation for me. I can have that conversation without necessary and it's easier for me to control my emotions. Whereas having that conversation with somebody who is oppressed and it affects them personally, you absolutely 100% have to expect that they are going to come at you hard, because this is something that affects them personally, their safety, their future. And so when I'm speaking to someone of the Black community, I'm like, throw it on me, you know, give me your rage, give me your hurt, give me your pain, you know, I will process that for you, you know. That's how we should be. That's how we should be, because that's what I expect out of my allies when I, you know, when I'm talking about any other cause that is specific to me and personal to me, you know. I expect my friends to take up, because the other person's gonna tell me, oh, calm down, don't say it like that, you know. And I'm like, no, the time for that is over. The time for that is over. Don't tell someone to calm down when this is something that literally they're afraid of, in fear, you know. Like, wrap your mind around that and then go and tone police someone. So I think I took up a lot of time, but one last thing that I feel like the Arab community also really needs to understand, the Arab American community specifically, is look at the benefits that we have received from what the Black community has done throughout all of the civil rights movement in the past hundreds of years. We would not be able to be in this country if the Black community had not fought this fight, and we benefited from it. So you're gonna come here, or whatever, we've been here for how long, 100 maybe years, you know, whereas Black community has been fighting this fight for 400 years, and you're gonna come and you're not gonna stand beside them no matter what, when you benefited from this. And make no mistake, their rights in this fight is gonna benefit you too. So don't stand in the way. If you can't be an ally, just stand aside.
Mona, I wanted, like, from a couple of things that Rasha, you know, has mentioned and stuff like that, and I wanted to go back to it because it seems like it's one of the most common responses, which is, what about our causes, you know? I mean, I understand it in the sense of Arab Americans have an incentive into, like, caring about this cause, but what about if you're Syrian, non-American Syrian, or non-American Palestinians? And of course, now with social media, we are connected to the whole world. We have, like, friends who are, you know, Americans and non-Americans. And we sometimes expect, maybe it's faulty, but you sometimes expect for them to equally care about other people's causes, because in the US, I don't know, growing up, it was, you find me in a Palestine rally, you find me in all sorts of different rallies, from Save the Whales to كل حاجة. So for me, it's natural, but here it seems like it's very like our people, our people, or if you extend it, it's a Muslim cause, kind of, but you can't really, like, I could care about what's happening in China if it's related to Muslims, what's happening in, you know, Bangladesh or somewhere, but I can't really, like, think about Black Americans as a cause, and that humanitarian thing is not there. So what would the response be if, you know, for people who are, like, anti-supporting this, that are not Americans? Is there anything to say to these people? Is there any reason for these people to even care about this?
I invoke my mother and I say Aib. Just like Aib alaikum, you know, to not care, and that our people need a reason to care about the lives of people. There's no logical argument that can make somebody who doesn't care, because it's a heart issue. It's a spiritual disease when you see somebody being killed in the street by someone with power, of people who have been struggling for their liberation for over 400 years, and to not have your heart impacted by that, and to say, why should I care? I'm not like them. I'm not connected to that. That's aib. And in the deepest sense, it's so shameful. That's the truest shame that I can think of, for a person's heart to be that dead. So I don't have a logical argument to make to an Arab to say you should care. I would say that if you don't care, you should get into a position of sajda, a position of asking your God, whoever you pray to, for forgiveness for not caring about a person, a human being who has suffered at the hands of an unjust system for 400 years, and you have to ask why you should care. I'm not even willing to make that, to go through the intellectual gymnastics of having to prove why we should care. I don't even believe in like guiding people gently by the hand, and I know I should. Like, I'm a mother. I understand that people sometimes need help along the path, but literally, I like, as I think I'm impacted by it, probably because I did grow up around a lot of Black people. I owe my art, I owe my career in a lot of ways to Black people, Black women specifically. So I'm sure that I'm more impacted by it because I love Black people, because they gave me my voice and taught me how to use it. But I don't believe that that's why I care. I care because I have a strong belief in justice and liberation, and I believe in God as Al-Adl. And if you claim to believe that, you better do some work to prove that you believe that. And that's not just for you, that's for the whole of the world. Like Rasulullah ﷺ was sent as a mercy to all of the worlds. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. All of the worlds. Does that not include Black people? Does that rahmah that Rasulullah ﷺ was sent with, does that not include Black people? Of course it does. And so as his community, as Muslims specifically, we have to care. And again, I'm not gonna try to make an intellectual argument for why Arabs should care, because
You know, that also brings us to the topic. Okay, this is about the other response that we have also from the Arabic community is, nowadays there's all of these studies about the different types of racism. So you hear a lot of the times that people say, but it's not like now the US is benchmarked as the worst of the racism. So everything beyond that looks like, oh, it's just a joke, oh, it's just light, which is kind of like, someone once told me that if someone steals a bubble gum or like kills somebody, it's not the same. It's both, a crime, but it's not the same. So there's those types of degrees of racism too. And it kind of reminds me of, I'm not really sure if you know, but the blackface situation that's happening in social media with a lot of people who they think it's an endearment and they just want to be accepted for their intentions instead of the bigger conversation. So I've been touring different places and reading about all of these different defensiveness about the level of racism that's in the Arab world. Is not problematic. Like, you don't, it's just, light humor, cute, type thing. So could you respond to the community, or even if it's in your family or whatever, like to the feel of this like light racism? Is that part of the defensiveness that you see coming out of some of the people that you have spoken to when you talk to them about anti-Blackness and in the community and so on and so forth? Rasha?
Are you asking me or Rasha? Okay,
Rasha.
good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, me?
Yeah, you.
So it's interesting that you're asking this, and to be clear, you're asking this with regards to the international community, correct?
Yeah, but is it so different
Okay.
than the one in the America and in the Arab American community? There's
I
no
think so.
anti-blackness.
No, I think so, very much. Why do I think so? Because
Okay.
I have this idea, maybe I'm wrong, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but
Yeah.
I have this from my interactions, the longer that you've been here in the States, the more exposed you are going to be to the Black community. And so being more exposed to the Black community is going to 100% make you more open to listening to the Black community when they tell you, no, this is not light racism. This is blackface. This is performative allyship. You are just doing this on Instagram or Twitter, whatever it is that they're doing it in order to get the followers and the likes, you know? Whereas I feel like in the Arab world, and from, you know, my experience living there, everybody kind of stays in their own groups, right? I mean, even when you have a country who there are many different groups of like different Arab communities, you know, they don't really mix, you know, you don't really have, you might know, you know, a Sudanese coworker at work, but that doesn't mean that you really mixed with them enough to be able to understand that when a Black person says this is racist or says that this is not light and that this is not okay, you need to accept that. It doesn't matter what your opinion is. You can't then turn around and be like, oh, no, that's not racist. That's fine. No, you're not Black. You don't know. So that point itself, I feel like is very hard for people to understand without having the experience and really mixing in with Black people, you know? So that's why, you know, addressing the international community on these issues is kind of hard for me, because I feel like there's a lot of experiences that they don't have to back up what I'm saying. Whereas when I'm talking to, you know, an Arab American who has been here for, let's say, 10, 15 years, I can connect with them in a way and bring up certain things that they can now see in a different light. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah.
So, and a lot of this performative allyship, I'm really over. I'm really over it. I mean, you cannot post about Black Lives Matter and change your profile and your cover photo and all that stuff, and then a post or two posts later condemn, you know, the protests and condemn that, you know, oh, you shouldn't protest because you're rioting and looting. No, you know, you can't do that. You are literally falling into the white supremacist trap of changing the narrative. Keep your narrative on Black Lives Matter and the injustices, and educating the community on the injustices of 400 years of systematic oppression. When you're using your platform to post about rioters and looters and condemn, we all condemn it. Nobody wants rioters and looters. You know, nobody thinks that, oh yes, this is okay. You know, and nobody know. But when
I actually do think it's okay. I think that the people who built this country as slaves have the right to ask for their liberation, and by any means necessary, invoking Malcolm. You know, people are telling Black people, don't loot, and these are literally people who, looted people. They stole people. Their ancestors literally stole people. So, I mean, Audre Lorde said, you know, that you can't dismantle the master's house with the master's tools. But she goes on to say that, you know, you have to try. You know, and that's the part of the quote that people often don't continue on to read, that you have to try. And I'm not going to cut down any part of the trying. Even if morally I disagree, I would never say that that was wrong, because people do have a right to, oh God, I wish I remembered the exact term, but like independently seek their liberation by whatever means they deem necessary, especially when we're dealing with a historic issue such as this. I mean, we're not talking about 50 years of systemic oppression. We're talking about 400 plus years, almost 500 years, if you consider the very origins of the transatlantic slave trade. So respectfully, I disagree. I think I really do. I mean, I know it's dangerous to say it and that we have to watch out for our necks. But Malcolm was absolutely right in that it is by any means necessary, because the oppressor will never hand you your freedom and liberation. It has to be taken.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. No, I mean, I definitely, I thank you for checking me, and thank you for jumping in with that, because there is no group in the history of this country that ever got their rights by being nice, and without violence. So, you know, people need to pick up history books. So yes, absolutely 100%.
You're great with history, and history, it's part of the problem is that there's a lot of missing history, a lot of,
whitewashed. It's all whitewashed.
Exactly. It was transferred by storytelling from generation to generation, and we still don't know how bad it really was. Like, what made it was what made it, but I think it was a lot worse than that. So,
and even the idea of violence itself, it's only wrong when it's being performed when it's being performed by people of color and people who are subject to empire. Violence is never a wrong thing when the American government wants to go over into the Middle East and attack a country and loot and pillage and burn and destroy. That's liberation, that's democracy, that's globalization. So we have to also think about what violence is, and it's a tool that people have always used, but it's only ever deemed wrong. I mean, sorry, my baby's at the door. You know, yeah, I mean, because my baby is at the door, you really do have to think about the future generation and, like, what are you willing to do for the life of your child? I mean, I see Black mothers losing their children in this war against Black people, and it's not right. And if it takes defunding the police as a first step and then abolishing the police as a second step, I have no issue with that. And if it means that they're going to burn a Target or burn a 7-Eleven, I honestly, that kind of violence I can get behind. Sorry.
You know, there is of course this clip that this woman explains about, like, why are you, because people kept saying, why are you basically burning down your neighborhood? And she goes,
the monopoly
We
analogy.
don't own anything. We don't own anything. Like, this is not our neighborhoods, really. Which actually makes us circle back to the Arabic and African American community relations, in terms of, in those neighborhoods, a lot of the times you find that it's either Arabic owners or Asian owners. So even having that relationship where you, in your own neighborhood, you can't take out a loan to own a business in your own neighborhood. And we come in with our own little stores there, setting up stores, and that creates a lot of tension of, like, you're basically taking up space there, and then these type of things happen where you're calling up the police on them, where, you know, your people have even said that, like, they, you know, you're selling all of this junk to them, and, like, nobody has ever went in and was like, let's, you know, bring affordable organic food, like, here, you know. It's like all of the stuff that causes the hypertension and the diabetes and then this and that. So even as a community, I guess the Arab American community needs to reflect on since you're already in those communities, how are you giving back to these communities, or are you taking advantage of them so that you can live in this other neighborhood, having a good life, and you come in, you take the loans, you take the businesses, and you sell them junk so that they're sicker, and you go and you're farhan, khalas, you're happy, you know, you go home with that. So that there is tension in the with the communities, even in that in itself, that causes this top down, and a lot of the times, you know, it's seen as it's not seen as in a we're minorities and we're together and we're whatever. I'm calling the police up on you. I'm taking up your stuff. So it's a very interesting relationship that the Arabic community has with those Black, you know, communities. And that's why when they mentioned the Palestinian owner of the store, there was a backstory to it. There's a history to it, to the big picture. It wasn't specifically this man, who is he and what's his intention, that people never even got there to discuss it. They were so caught up onto the guy's character that they weren't able to just step back and see it. Yeah.
And that's the problem with focusing on these issues, because you never get to the big picture. You never get to the important part, right? So when we're focusing, for example, on the rioting and looting, you're not focusing on how do we dismantle and change the system, right? When you're focusing on this one store owner, you're not elevating and you're not talking about the conversation, the larger conversation of us as Arab Americans. When we are in these Black communities and when we have these stores in the Black communities, why are we not getting to know these Black communities? Why are we not mixing in with them? Because if we had done that in the beginning, we would have known. You don't call the police, you know? And what's really interesting is that the store owner himself posted on Facebook, and one whole paragraph of that post was dedicated to, we did not know, and from now on, we are not calling the police over these kinds of things, and we will figure out different ways to handle these issues and not involve the police unless it's like a last resort. I don't know what obviously that means, but it, you know, it took a guy dying for us to see that, you know. So I just feel like, you know, a lot of us not mixing in the Black communities obviously is our own community's racism, right? And our own community's, you know, lack of mixing, and also are used to being Ansariyin. I mean, we are very Ansari, you know. I'm gonna stand with the Palestinian before I stand with the Syrian, but the Syrian is North Arab, so I'm gonna stand with the Syrian against the Khaliji, you know. But the Khaliji and the North Arabs are more Arab than the North Africans, because so I'm gonna stand with them. It's not, you know, we need to open our minds that we are all different, and we all have different cultures, even within the Arab community. But we need to celebrate those differences, and we need to understand what is right, what is wrong. And justice is what matters, not the person's nationality, and not the person's family, or their, you know, who they know. And you know, this whole idea, we need to stop doing that, especially if we are going to be in this country and helping to build it. And I really hope I see the Arab community really reaching out to the Black community and lifting them up in any way possible, whether it is, you know, supporting Black owned businesses, whether it's, you know, using your platform, whichever way possible, without the performative allyship of the blackface and the, you know, wow, look at me, you know, kinds of things that I've been seeing. Let's do some real work.
There's probably going to be a whole talk just on social media and the shaming of influencers and the pressure on influencers to support causes. Now it's just expected. Why are you silent? Why do you look happy? There's somebody that died in some place, and you're not always up to date, and you get shamed until you know, hear the news and stuff like that. I myself, honestly, like, and not to be off topic, but last year when the Majzara of Sudan happened during the Sudanese revolution. It was the night of Eid. I was wrapping gifts, and I literally put a post about like, it's Eid tomorrow. And I got so much flack from the community, my followers, who asked me, are you even Sudanese? Why is your heart dead? And to me, I didn't even get the news. The news was just coming through. And I was massacred basically on DM and on my messages, and people were just like, I can't believe you. Like, and I was like, dude, this happened like 2 hours ago. How am I going to hear about this? So there is this pressure that's always happening on like, okay, now you heard about George Floyd, what are you going to do? And now we're, expecting, if you have thousands of followers, you're supposed to talk about this. Otherwise, what's the use of your platform? So inshallah, we'll definitely be talking about that more. Marwa, Nof, Dunya, Mariam, if any of you guys want to unmute and speak, you could, to ask questions if you'd like, or comment. So please do let me know if you would like to speak or not.
Can I share something about just a historical piece? Arabs, specifically non-Black Arabs, were brought in a very strategic way, similar to historically when you think about the Irish and the Irish working as a servant society, where they were serving the Protestants. Arabs were brought in a very similar way, where we were professionals to serve the infrastructure of white people. And it's called a filler society, right? We're like a filler class. We're a filler class. And so what happens is we don't even know, because we don't read history, we don't care to, that we're being used as pawns in a game of chess. Literally, empire is playing a game of chess, and white supremacy is playing this game, and we're pawns. We are given space in the Black community. My husband is a farmer, and he doesn't call them food deserts, he calls them food swamps, because there's a lot of food. It's just garbage, it's not a desert. There's a lot of food. It's expired milk and processed cheese and processed food and chips and GMO everything. Yeah. And it's garbage. It's a swamp, because nobody wants it. And we're literally given the work of peddling this to those who are just a degree or two lower than we are as a filler class. And we don't even see this stratification and caste system within our society. And instead we just say, oh, Islamophobia, we're oppressed too. We can't be.
I've heard that a lot.
Yeah. And so it just really makes me roll my eyes, because once you've studied the history of America, specifically Arabs should be able to see themselves, non-Black Arabs should be able to see themselves as the Irish of the modern day, who are being sent out to catch Black people in the act. And it's not accidental. So you have this Arab store owner who catches this guy in the act, and his first instinct is to call the police. When, I'm sorry, but he knows what happens when Black men are caught by former slave patrols. Everybody knows that history. We know that history. So it is foolish to say that we don't know about Trayvon Martin. We don't know about Philando Castile. We don't know about these stories of Black men and white men. We don't know these stories of violence, but somehow Black people are violent. Black men are violent. So I just wanted to share that piece of history of American society specifically, and who Arab are within this sphere. And we have to stop lying to ourselves about what space we occupy within the colonial model.
And bringing up this Islamophobe thing, you reminded me that that's definitely something that everyone mentions at some point when they're having this debate, is that they say, oh, I understand what's going on with the African American community. When I went to the States, for a vacation.
It's just another way to say all lives matter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But the thing is that, like, really think about it. Like today, if I had another Arab friend that is Muslim, that's getting lots of flack because she wears hijab. She takes off her hijab. She can maybe pass for white. I take off my hijab. I pass for African American. Like I don't go any up wala down in the thing. I just have one less, thing that they can profile me with. But I go nowhere. But some people, you literally can take off something or change your clothes, and you can ascend in society in terms of profiling. But I don't have that magic power.
Right. And that's something that the Arab community really needs to wrap their mind around, is you have white privilege. And it's exactly what, when I was saying, you were put here for a reason, and you are a step or two above. That's how this structure works, and that's how this system works. So for you not to recognize your own privilege and being able to use this system, or having the system use you, however you want to, look at it, but you are able to open up a store or a business in these communities where the people of that own community can't open them up.
Right.
That is a huge amount of privilege. If you're applying for a job, okay, they're going to hire, if they have an African American name and an Arab name, they're going to hire the Arab name before they hire the African American name. That is your privilege. You have privilege. Because we are discriminated against, because we are profiled, does not mean that you are on the same level. Okay, we are talking 400 years. We are talking systematic oppression. Arabs have not been, I hesitate to say this, but I have not been systematically oppressed like the Black community has. So for us to pretend that, oh yeah, I understand because I was profiled, or this person had prejudice against me, or et cetera, no, you don't understand. Stay quiet, listen, because the more you listen, the more you're going to learn. I have learned more, I think, in the past 2 weeks than in years, just from looking and listening and understanding where the Black community is coming from. And you could have asked me a year ago, defund the police, and I've been like, what do you mean defund the police? We need the police. Now I'm like, get rid of them. Get rid of them. No, we don't need them to be policing things that and involved in things that they don't need to be involved in. We don't need a police force to, stop people who have headlights out. We don't need a police force to go in and, deal with domestic issues. That's not what the police force should be doing.
And in some countries, there are cameras, like speeding cameras. There aren't like a police every mile to stop you and then look at you and decide, I like this person, I don't like this person, I'm having a bad day today, I'm going to shoot this person or not. Mafi, it's like, it's some kind of like America's advance. Why don't you just put like these speeding cameras and khalas, just charge everyone and end of story. Lots of countries have that. Like there's no police on the side of the road disguising themselves to kind of catch you without headlights or tail lights or checking your registration. What type of job is, it's very interesting. But once you leave the US, you start remembering, it's like, how do you come in contact with the police so often? Like, I barely see the police, like where I live, I barely see the police. But in the US, it was like, it's like speeding. It's like, I don't know, you just get stopped like often.
They're in schools. They're in schools, Isra.
Yeah. Yes.
You've got resource officers in schools, you have people wanting to put them in elementary schools, like why? Why do you need a police officer in an elementary school or a middle school or a high school? That is the school to prison pipeline. I feel like, a lot of Arabs who are in this, who come here, don't understand this and don't really know this. And the problem also is our ego. Our ego does not allow us to sit down, be quiet, and educate ourselves and really understand and learn. We just get defensive, not all Arabs. We're not racist. We can't be racist. Muslims can't be racist. Look at Bidan. Like, that's not, no. That's not how this works.
I really heard that a lot. Or I think the most, if I were to categorize the comments that I got back, because I post a lot about BLM, I think the most common one I get is, Alhamdulillah, we are Muslims. And I actually never know how to respond to that, because yeah, Alhamdulillah. But like when you connect it to what's happening, it's like, is it because we're Muslims, we're not racist? Or
Yeah,
I just like, I don't know how to respond to that, but that's the most common one. It's like, wow, look at what they're doing. Alhamdulillah, we're Muslims. This is a very
yeah,
common
because Muslims
I
are
mean,
immune.
we're just so backwards. I'm so sorry. Like, I think about the kafala system, and literally I get the same message as Isra, and it's mind-boggling, because in a country like Saudi, for instance, where you have such aggravated, literally, cases of murder of maids and rape of maids, and it's impossible to prove, and it's insidious, and it's the same type of attitude as the police and Black people in America, where who are you going to believe? Who is society going to believe? A Sri Lankan maid or a Saudi guy, right? Like, who are you going to believe? A Black man or a white police officer? Like, though it's, for me, it's on par with the same situation. And so when we say Alhamdulillah, we're Muslim, we don't have to deal with that kind of stuff. These Americans, they're so backwards. Like, it's honestly like, I have to laugh sometimes when I get those messages. Like, literally, you're sitting on your butt in Saudi Arabia doing nothing about the kafala system, and you want to say, Alhamdulillah, we're Muslim and we don't have these kinds of issues. Like, it's just,
But
it's like,
I
go
think,
ahead.
you know, the thing is that regardless of these comments that are happening, I do feel like there are lots of people that are more aware. And I guess the whole conversation about why haven't you been aware before is a totally different topic. But I feel like people are taking these conversations to their homes. And as the days went by, I do see more people posting about various things to check their own communities. More people are being brave and more honest and calling it out in every community that I've seen. I feel like hopefully what this whole Black Lives Matter movement in the US is going to do is, from Australia to Berlin to London to everywhere, people are moved in a way that's like, it's 2020, this is happening in the US, and then, oh my God, wait a minute, the US is the one that sets standards for human rights. Oh my God, what is happening, right? So it's like, definitely, like, people are more aware, and I don't know how long it's gonna last. Just like how we don't know, I'm gonna do a science joke, just like how we don't know after you get infected with COVID how long your immunoglobulins are gonna stay and you're gonna be immune to it. We don't know how long these people are going to be immune and working on being anti-racist and working on being anti-Black and all of this. Right now, that's the hype. So we will just know in months from now. Are you going to go back to what's familiar, to what's useful, or is this knowledge that you're going to keep and actually you're going to use it to change your life and those around you, and you're educating your friends and so on? I wish if Nof would have came into the conversation, but Nof is muted.
Sorry, I was listening. Hi, everyone. Thank you. I'm sorry. The reason I don't have my video on is because Saad didn't tell me this was actually going to be a proper Zoom call. I thought this was going to be a webinar, and you don't want to see numbers right now.
I don't know how to do the webinar, no.
We'll need to talk about that. Thank you very much for the talk. Both Rasha and Mona, it was so interesting listening to your perspective. Can we ask questions now, or are we?
Yes, please, Nof.
Okay, I have. Well, it's not questions, it's really perspective. So just as a bit of a background, I'm an Emirati, born and raised here in the UAE, in Abu Dhabi. Isra and I are colleagues, we're friends, but we're also colleagues in UAE, and that's how we know each other. And we've had, you can ask her, we've had several conversations about this. So I've got so many things on my head right now. There's just so many. It's very different. It's very difficult to unpack everything right now. But I think the main thing, which kind of is an overarching right now, is you both are very familiar with the climate in the Gulf when it comes to. I think the difference between the U.S. narrative or the Western narrative. Can you hear me, by the way? I don't know if
there was a couple of words that skipped over, but continue.
Sorry.
The Gulf narrative and U.S. narrative.
Yeah, it's that. Look, it all comes down to what platform is available for us to have conversations on, right? So for me, for example, here, I really value the conversations I have with my circle of friends. I think that we need to be very, very realistic about what is the bandwidth of change we could create within our communities, or the other, for lack of a better term. So here, because of the unavailability of similar platforms where we could really have those conversations on a wide scale it up and have it for a wider community, the change that we could make is basically going to be within our own families, within our circles and stuff like that. What I find difficult to find the word for, or the vocabulary for, is reconciling all of the different things that you guys have talked about in terms of systemic racism, the role that Arabs have played in all of this, trying to draw parallels here, understanding the difference between performative sympathy, performative allyship, all of that. It's still, I feel like all of that, we're not even there. And I might be ignorant. Like I feel like we don't even have the vocabulary for that within the communities that we have here. And part of it comes from a place of privilege. It does come from the fact that we are privileged. We know how to use that word, throw it around, right? But we also use it in a privileged way. And it's really sad, but we're learning to do that. And part of that, and I think where we're stuck at, is having uncomfortable conversations. Being able to not be defensive. And I struggle with that a lot. I struggle with that because every time I react or feel uncomfortable about a subject, any subject that I try to kind of evade or not engage in conversation with, I know it comes from a place of defensiveness, and I know that I have to unpack it one way or the other. But I guess from your experience, and I'm sure that, I think in the beginning of your career, whether you were, and through activist roles, maybe you have personal examples within your families, and this is and I completely understand, because this is very specific to this region. And I don't know if you've had experience with that, but what kind of advice, or just from your perspective, how could you start conversations like that when you don't have a platform? Or how do you start conversations like that with the intention of impacting change when you don't have the platform to do that? And how do you know that you're doing enough? Because sometimes you don't want to be muted at the same time. So it's a formula, right? You want to be able to say enough without having to be muted. But you also want to be very respectful of the community that you're living in, and you need to be able to reconcile a lot of things which are very, very difficult. And even now, like even as an adult, trying to reconcile even the religion and the culture and all of that, and the roles that they have played through the narratives that we're all now living is very difficult. So I don't know if my question was long-winded, I guess, but yeah, I was just wondering if you had any thoughts around that.
Oh, that's awesome.
Or if just anything of what I said kind of stood out to you guys, something that could start a conversation, I guess.
Yeah.
Rasha Rasha or Mona, any of you want to take on this platform, like what is doing enough, and while being very wise in terms of like being realistic, basically.
Right. Mona, do you want to do it, or?
Feel free, Rasha. You seem like you're ready. Go for it.
I'm ready for it. I'm just joking. So I definitely understand where exactly you're coming from, Nof. Whether it is conversations in Facebook groups with a lot of, because, Facebook groups, everyone, birds of a feather, you've got a group for this and a group for that. So, my Facebook groups where it's like, the Arab, housewives or whatever. And then, also conversations within my own family. And, it's interesting how to recognize their road to getting woke. That's what I call it, right? You've got your people who are at certain stages, and I kind of think of my own, sort of road and my own path to getting where I am, and recognizing obviously there's still a long way to go, even for everybody. So it's the only thing I can really say is, with a lot more experience in having these conversations, you'll learn to kind of feel out the person and recognize where they are, and then kind of go back to where they are in order to kind of help them move along, right? I've in the past 2 weeks, I think I've collected so many little short videos or posts that are just like mostly pictures or things that are really striking. And they're arguments to certain things that I have seen, come out of the Muslim community. So when they say, oh, alhamdulillah, we're Muslim, we can't be racist, we have bilad, whatever, I've got a post for that, and it's easier to give them smaller resources, shorter resources for them to digest. And then I start kind of giving them more. And then, they graduate to watching the 13th. And then they watch When They See Us on Netflix, or they watch, all the different kinds of, resources that are out there. And they start to read, or if they're a reader, they read the White Fragility book, so many. So a lot of what helps me, again, is really listening to that person, even though you really don't want to, and seeing where they are, and then being able to respond in a way that is meaningful to them and will open their eyes and moving them forward on that path. And then you also spoke about, being defensive, and how your own self, you get defensive and you want to evade certain things and things like that. That also comes with, with experience. And, when you feel yourself getting that way, all you have to remember is, this isn't about me. This is not about me. We need to learn to center people who are oppressed. We need to learn to remember that, when somebody comes at me and is, saying something that I might take offense to, but they're telling me about their own oppression, I can't get defensive and shut down, because that's not going to help the person. So if you really want to help the Black community, you really want to help people, oppressed people, in general, this goes for everybody. And that's the kind of the mantra that I keep, kind of giving, is that, we are learning to be allies right now to the Black community, but what you're learning is going to help you be allies to many others. And, when we help the Black community, we help everybody. That's kind of like what my message and what I have been trying to tell everybody. Because the minute you get defensive, the minute you shut down, the minute you start to take offense at what they're saying, instead of listening and really taking in the message and asking specific questions and clarifications, that's where your growth is going to be. Growth is not easy. Learning is not easy. And so I commend you for really taking this on and going back to your own circles, and doing the work, and make no mistake, doing the work in your own little circles is not nothing. So when you say, is it enough? I don't know. I mean, I guess I'll leave that up to Mona to answer.
I'm not God.
Right.
I'm not God. I'm never going to tell nobody that what they're doing is enough or not enough, because only we can answer that question inside of our own selves. I mean, that's really between a person and their own capacity. Like what one person can do is not what another person can do, but you know precisely what it is you can and cannot do, because we all are honest with ourselves in those quiet moments, whether we want to be or not. We all know if we're pushing hard enough, if we're doing enough, if we feel connected to what we're saying and doing, because though that literally that rahmah descends on our hearts when we're speaking the truth and saying the things that need to be said in our families, in our communities, in our workplaces. So I echo what you said, Rasha. It's really about, you know, baby steps, like barraha, you know, gently, and also making sure that you're not silent and you're not just letting things pass, you know. Isra, you were talking about jokes, you were talking about little things here and there, and that's you know, that's really what we have to be constantly vigilant about. And in terms of like you know, societies in MENA, in the MENA region, like, I mean, let's be honest, this is something that's been happening in the US for over 400 years. So when we think about that, we also have to say, like, it's not just a privilege piece why these things are not happening in Al Imarat, you know, why we're not having these conversations in a bigger way, because the conversation is not 400 years old. It's not an evolved, developed conversation, and you just have to look at it from a historical context and be honest. We're babies in our liberation studies compared to Black liberation theology.
Exactly.
You know,
Yes.
we're babies on the path, and that's not to say that we don't have a responsibility in terms of what age we live in, because we all live in this moment, in this time, and we have a responsibility based on that. And we know لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. Like, we're here for a reason, because we can handle it, because we can do it, because we can create justice in this world right now. So it's not about like giving yourself a pass because it's not been 400 years, but it's to say, like, be honest with where the conversation is at. But also, like, hey, why not be a visionary in your community? You know, like, that's never a bad thing. I mean, like, that's awesome if you go down in the books as somebody who struggled for the sake of justice and for the sake of liberation, for the sake of God. Like, that's not a bad thing in my book.
You know, in terms of other like resources and stuff like that, I feel like you both touched upon experience. And I think if I were to recommend something for people, it would be to actually go elsewhere and be amongst like people and new ideas and new things. We can read and we can watch the documentaries and all of that. But there is something about like the street smartness of this that is really important. I have the opposite problem. I've mixed and I've mingled and I've been exposed to, but I don't have the book smart word, like, you know, knowledge, which I'm trying to catch up on. And a lot of the times I'm attracted to people who are like the readers and they have, you know, the theories and stuff, because that's what I'm lacking. But I think that a lot of the times, sometimes, you know, people in the region, whether it's Sudan or wherever, you travel to go to college in the UK or the US or whatever, but you're younger. So when you're younger, your experience to that experience isn't to learn about culture and society and this and that. It's like, it's an identity time, right? You're discovering yourself and you're having a good time or whatever it is. But then if you were to go back at the grad school level, it would be a little bit different, because, you know, now that you've grown, you've worked, you've figured out your identity, whatever, and now you're specific into how do I have more experience with this or that. Then when you go back to study, it would be different than when you have done it the first time around. So always, I guess, my recommendation would be to go there. Go, like, if you're interested in US history, whatever, like go there, or maybe even study in Howard University, or more, like go and just be in the communities, be amongst the people, listen, and immerse yourself, like in that, instead of collecting all of the information from like books and articles. There's nothing like human connection at all. There's nothing like being in specific towns and communities and educational institutions. It's a very amazing experience. So that's another route or another resource if you are able to afford that, or if you're in a phase in your life where you're thinking about grad school. So
I totally agree, Isra, but I also don't even think you have to go anywhere necessarily, especially, you know, for people who don't have the means. I'll just tell a story of my friend Noura Fitzgerald, who lives in Marrakesh, and she literally saw a woman on the street, and she saw her day after day and felt compelled to talk to her and to connect with her. And this was a woman who, you know, just like would sell knickknacks on the street to feed her family. Noura ended up talking to her, connecting with her, and she founded this multinational, at this point, NGO based on just connecting with this one woman in her own community. She taught her how to make chocolate chip cookies, because Noura knew how to make chocolate chip cookies as an American Moroccan woman. You know, she connected with this woman and taught her this skill, and the woman started selling chocolate chip cookies, and it turned into a restaurant, that turned into a nonprofit, that turned into an NGO, that turned into a business that they're replicating all over Morocco, that is being used as a learning facility, as a skills teaching initiative. You know, there's so much hope in our own communities. There's so much possibility in our own communities, and it really doesn't even take going anywhere else. It takes looking at what's around you and just like being creative and seeing what the need is, because there's always a haja. There's always somebody who is in need of care, love, support, connection, compassion. There's always and you know, I believe that time that Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, I said this on Instagram today, but I believe in that hadith where there will be a day when we look around trying to give sadaqah, and there will be nobody to give it to, because we're building that world. We're actively building it with our dreams, our hopes, and our efforts. And we all have to start where we live. You know, we all have to start in the place that we live. I'm not the best at it, so I'm just sharing my friend's story because she's pretty good at it. You can all check out her work. It's actually called the Amal Center in Marrakesh. It's a restaurant, NGO, nonprofit, etc. And it's a beautiful model for anybody interested in replicating it. It just teaches women how to cook as a means to support themselves and their families. And wherever we go, women are at the margins. You know, this is a conversation about BLM, but you know, we know that we live in globalized patriarchy, and that Black women specifically are at the bottom of the totem pole no matter where you go. So that is probably the, you know, one of my friends, Ebony Janice, she says that, you know, when Black women are free, everyone will be free. And so look around you and look at where the Black women are and find them and be their support, be their beloved, be their, you know, means of everything that they need in the world, not for your own sake, not for performativity, not for anything, but for the sake of love, you know, and we'll heal the world that way, I think.
Rasha, do you have any also like closing words? This seemed like it's so powerful that we can't top that.
I definitely am not even gonna try. I've been taking some notes like while, you know, everything, and I feel like we definitely covered a lot of things. And you know, I really, that was amazing. I'm glad to have been on this call. I'm glad that I could do this with Mona. I'm excited to see this conversation happening within our own communities, our families, And, you know, even further than that, we as a community, I don't think has really addressed the issue of racism very well, or ever. I don't know. I don't remember that we've ever really addressed it, right? We've always just been about, oh, the government's oppression and, you know, intifada and, you know, let's, you know, topple our governments. But, you know, our own civil rights and racist issues, I feel like we haven't really had time for that before. So it's exciting to see
Well,
these conversations.
we just got out of the colonial period, so give us another 50 years. I think we'll get there, inshallah.
Well, then that means we're ahead. Yes.
Yeah.
For credit.
Totally. Yeah, I have so much hope. And Isra, I really want to say thank you so much for hosting this, inviting us to talk about this thing that a lot of people don't want to talk about. And that is the very reason that, you know, you're somebody we should look to and follow for facilitating a conversation like this. Thank you so much.
Well,
Absolutely. 100%.
thank you guys actually for joining me on this, you know, first call. And, you know, I had to just do it because I don't know if you guys have that, but it's kind of like the perfectionism. You over analyze things, you over plan it, and then it never happens. I have 500 of these projects, right? But this time, I'm so thankful that both Rasha and you, like, were very kind and gentle throughout the whole process. And it happened because of that. So Rasha didn't even have the link to join because I didn't even send it to her. So I'm like, where's Rasha? Rasha's late. And she's like, I don't know where to go. So like, thank you very much, you know, for joining me on this. And hopefully, inshallah, the next talk is going to be about systemic racism and the myth of pulling yourself up by the bootstrap. So we're going to have two people from the community, two African Americans, Alta, who is the Associate Director of Intercultural Education and Spiritual Life at New York University, and she's also the Assistant Dean of Students here, and also Rashad Fields, who is an attorney and a lawyer. He's worked on the Department of the Interior and lots of other positions also.
Dang, big hitters.
Yes, and following that, we're going to have one about intergenerational trauma. So we're going to have Natalia Winters, which is, she's fabulous. She's really, really active on social media and activist. And then we're going to have Latino Black versus Brown discussion next Sunday. Following Tuesday is the Desi community. And then after that,
she's getting it all.
Yeah. And then we
Going
have
for it. I love it.
which is really, that one I really want you guys to, inshallah, you know, join. But it's African Americans who have left the US and just moved back to Africa for good. And one of them was actually part of the Black Panthers, and she moved to Ghana in the 1990s. And it's really interesting, like her whole journey and stuff like that. So inshallah, we will continue this. I will fix the lights, fix the webinar, and shukran everyone. Shukran.
Thank you so much, Isra.
Bye. Thank you.